Good morning, members. Welcome to the Planning and Development Management Committee for the 24th of October. Could I first ask, do we have any apologies?
Convener, apologies from Councillor Band. I'm substituting for him.
Thank you, Councillor. Any others?
And Councillor James, an emergency, so he can't come.
Thank you.
Yes, Convener. We also have apologies from Councillor McCall with Councillor Illingworth substituting and Councillor Simpson with Councillor Robertson substituting.
I'm doing it now. First of all, if I may introduce everyone for you. From my right, Mr. Niven, Mr. Scott, Mrs. Conliffe, all from planning. Myself, Councillor Bob Braun, sitting in today for Councillor Ros McCall, who is the normal convener, who's away on holiday. And then to my left, Mr. Elliott from Legal Services, and to his left, Mr. Williams from Committee Services. Councillor McCall has asked me to read something short before we commence anything else, and I've put this together from her bullet points. The convener has asked me to remind members that this is a quasi-judicial committee, and as such there should be no political content, even in the form of off-the-cuff remarks. It is her hope that the committee will remember to adhere to this policy. Thank you.
Convener, can I ask what's prompted the Vice Convener's concern in this regard?
I understand she heard some remarks at the last committee. She hasn't given me any further details than that, and that's the reason she asked me to read that out. Thank you. Do we have any declarations of interest today? Thank you. We have several deputations to hear today. Can I ask for your agreement that we will hear those? Thank you. May I also remind members that their mobile phones and equipment should be set to silent mode for the duration of this meeting. Am I, with your permission, to sign the minutes from the last committee? Great. Okay, members, we'll move to the first applications. Now, the first two applications we have on here are both related to Murray Royal. And obviously much of the supporting information within these reports is duplicated. And therefore, it has been decided we will hear these together. We will have deputations, we will deal with both together. I've agreed that in this instance, both deputations can have 7 minutes to speak as opposed to a normal 5. And obviously when the deputations are finished, you can then question each one as you go, but your questions obviously can relate to both reports. Once we've done that and had questions to officers, we'll then have to move to debate, and at that time we will then have to debate on each as a separate item. So could I first of all ask Mr. Scott to introduce the Murray Royal report?
Thank you, Vice Convener. Yes, prior to going into the stills which are above you at the moment, I have a number of updates in relation to both reports. That's for item 511 and 512. So from here on, I'll refer to 511 as the in-principle application for the residential development and 512 as the change of use of application for residential development of the listed buildings. Firstly, in relation to item 511, reason for refusal 3 on page 52 of your papers, it's to advise that the word does in the final sentence is superfluous to requirements, so we propose that that would be removed from that reason for refusal. Moving on to further updates, this affects both reports, both for the in-principle and for the change of use application. The site history section for both applications correctly refers to the fact that there's a listed building consent application for the conversion of the listed buildings themselves. However, reference is made on paragraph 63 of the in-principle report and 61 of the change of use application stating that this application has actually been approved under delegated powers. That's not the case. Whilst it's our intention and likelihood to move forward with an approval for the application, it is still pending consideration and has not been determined as yet. Lastly, members will be aware that we received yesterday a letter from the applicant's legal representatives. This letter has been provided to you electronically, and there are paper copies available should any members not have this letter. Mr. Williams will pass out some. So, members, you will note that this letter, as I said, is from the legal representative of the applicant for both of the Murray Royal applications which are being considered today. Wish to provide an update on specific matters in this letter, not necessarily the entire contents. Firstly, it's considered in reference to the use of the indicative drawings and having regard to potentially using conditions as opposed to recommending reasons for refusal, that it would be appropriate for offers to seek and have regard to indicative plans in making a recommendation today. It was not considered on this occasion to defer consideration of these matters through planning conditions, as they are central to development being sought and the impacts that would arise from them. In respect of transport, just wish to specifically highlight that the prospect of phasing, as indicated in the letter, we are aware of the suggestion being made by the applicant, and indeed there have been numerous attempts by officers to seek a justification for any phased approach. However, in the absence of that information, we don't have any basis for which to recommend phasing of the development would be appropriate, and as information is not forthcoming, as detailed in the committee report, it does amount to a reason for refusal as reasons one for both items. In respect of biodiversity matters, officers do not consider that the AI report contains a specific species protection plan as indicated, and indeed advises that one would be written and presumably submitted at a later date. Scottish Natural Heritage advise in their consultation response that a plan is requested to be produced, and until such time they are unable to provide further advice on the acceptability of the scheme in respect of the impact on bats as a European protected species. I'll draw members' attention now specifically to paragraph 136 of the committee report for the full application for the change of use, so that's item 512. In this paragraph, it does incorrectly refer to surveys being undertaken in 2017 for the two ward buildings and the main building. This is incorrect, and it is accepted that these were surveyed in 2017. However, the main building was only surveyed in 2016. Further, in relation to bats, officers accept that neither a species protection plan or updated surveys from the 2016 surveys were requested from the applicant by officers, and this was an admission. Nonetheless, we do maintain that we have an obligation to consider the potential impact on bats as a European protected species through EU directives and habitats regulations, and therefore we do maintain the position that these matters have not been addressed, and therefore the reason for refusal in that regard for both reports is appropriate and remains valid. In summary, it's accepted that it is appropriate to update members and provide correction in both respects of bats. However, we're satisfied that the remainder of the committee reports address the other matters satisfactorily, namely transport, the use of indicative drawings and planning condition to overcome any potential concerns appropriately, and the paper is presented as you have before you, subject to those amendments.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. In view of the letter that's been handed out, do members require any extra time to read the letter? We'll have 5 minutes for the moment. Yep. Members, are we ready to proceed? Yeah. Are we ready to proceed?
Convener, could I ask a procedural question?
You may indeed.
Obviously, this letter raises a number of issues, and we've already had a response from the Planning Service. Do we know when the developer got a copy of the report of handling?
I'll ask Glenys.
As Councillor Wilson, all the papers were distributed online via the council's website last Monday.
Okay. And when did we receive this response? Because it's dated yesterday.
It was midday yesterday.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Gray, you wanted the point as well?
Thank you, Convener. Unless Paul invited discussion on these issues, has any discussion taken place with them?
On a number of the matters, discussion has been taking place since the application was validated in terms of transport and a number of the issues. As alluded to in respect of the specific concerns about bats, we haven't requested that information. There's not a specific discussion that has recently taken place on that, but certainly through the course of determining all the relevant considerations, there have been a number of meetings and communications with the applicant from the case officers about those aspects of the proposal.
And are they aware of your feelings that you put to us earlier on regarding all these issues? Which I've got to say I've not got full clarity on at this point in time.
The update I've given today was for the benefit of committee, so it would be the first response. The first time the applicant would have had our response to this letter. We haven't responded specifically to the letter and points raised in the letter, other than to committee today. I thought this was the most appropriate place to do that.
Thank you. I'll now invite the first deputation. This is... Sorry, I beg your pardon. Jumped the gun there.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Yes, I'll take you now through some stills just to show you the context of the development and point out a few specific aspects of it as we go through. So what we have here is an aerial shot clearly of the application site. What you can see is the red line boundary here is specifically the application site boundary for the change of use application. So that's the full planning permission is item 512. And the blue boundary is also an application site in its own right. It's not denoting that this is other land within the control. It's actually this entire site boundary for the in-principle application for the residential development for up to 70 dwellings. So you'll see they are discrete in their own right, and they have their own site boundaries, albeit they do overlap at the point of access onto Muirhall Road. We can see the red line boundary does jut out at that particular point. So just to highlight that the buildings, I'm sure a lot of members will be aware, to the immediate north of the application site is the new Murray Royal Hospital complex. To the east of the site, beyond the core path that flanks that entire boundary and is indeed incorporated within the site boundary for the in-principle application, it's open countryside. And to the south, the southwest and west, essentially it's the residential areas of Canoe and Gannicky that we have before us. So just in terms of context, the site boundaries, it's 5.5 hectares in terms of the size of the site for the in-principle application, and it's approximately 3.3 for the other site. This plan here is actually the demolition plan, which is in support of the application. So again, as with the aerial shot shown there, the plans I'm going to show will show both sites collectively. Just to save repetition, they do in fact show the same detail, but I will specifically highlight points that are relevant to each specific application. This in essence is an existing site plan, so this is what we have on site today. You can see within the red line site boundary, the A-listed building of the main hospital building of Murray Royal is in the central location, and to the northwest of it, the three individually listed buildings, which I'll come to talk about later. And within the blue line area within this site, you can see there are a number of buildings indicated on the western part of the site. They are indicated in an orange colour, as indeed are some smaller areas within the other site boundaries. The orange area indicates buildings that are to be demolished, and on the main hospital building itself, the orange areas indicate areas of the buildings which are proposed to be removed and downtaking, so essentially a partial demolition that would form part of that application. So this is the indicative site layout plans that's been submitted for the in-principle application. So on this occasion, the red line site boundary is for the in-principle application, and the blue is for the change of use application. So as the report refers to, an indicative site plan was sought, and it was submitted as part of the application at the outset. This shows the potential scale of development for up to 70 dwellings that has been sought by the applicant in this regard. So you can see that there are 70 dwellings on that location. And in terms of the change of use application, the proposal would be to retain the listed building, the main listed building, which is a category A listed building, and convert it to 50 residential units. And there are, as I mentioned, 3 other buildings to the north. I'll show closer photographs of those, but suffice to say that the 2 villa buildings are proposed to be converted to 4 residential units each, and the chapel to be retained with no external changes and used for communal purposes. So this is the first of the photos that I'll show you today. This is the main approach from Muirhall Road into the application site. So this is as existing and as it would have been when the hospital was in operation. So this is the principal approach to the principal elevation. You can see just beyond the trees there that the building is just visible, and indeed later parts of it to the rear are also visible. So this is the main elevation approach, which is referenced in the report. This is taken from the immediate setting to the south of the principal elevation of the main hospital building, which you have before you there. So as I've alluded to, the proposal is essentially to undertake some external renovations and downtakings, but principally the changes would be internal of nature in terms of facilitating the new use of this building to create the 50 residential units. And at this location, the grass area which extends to the right of this shot is the immediate curtilage of the listed building, which is proposed predominantly to be kept as an open space area, albeit in this particular location there is also a proposal for car parking, which would serve for the residents of the conversion to the listed building. This is to the north and effectively the rear of the main listed building. It's the 3 other listed buildings I referenced earlier. So from left to right, it's the Burnham Villa, which is proposed to be converted into residential use for 4 units. The chapel in the middle, which has essentially been retained and made good as is for communal use. And again, the other villa on the other side, which again would be 4 residential units. This is taken from a northern point from off the main access. So this is essentially progressively moving east on the application site. This would be the approximate entrance location to the residential development at the Zone B, which is the medium scale residential development, which would be to the south of the listed building off the access. And as you can see, moving beyond here, that it's essentially an open parkland type nature, and this would be proposed to be the site for the erection of a number of residential dwellings. Just beyond here, and it's probably slightly, you can't make it out, but beyond the trees, there is an industrial therapy unit building, which is a fairly modern build within the complex. And whilst within the curtilage, it's not necessarily listed as part of that curtilage, and it's proposed to remove that building. This is progressively moving further east on the site and up the hill. As you can see, it's obviously got an established landscape framework in terms of a number of trees. Some of these, and indeed others on the site, do benefit from TPOs for their protection. In this area, this is generally where the lower scale residential development is proposed in Zone A, so of larger plots with larger dwellings. And only to point out at this location, the only nearest residential property that bounds onto the application site is just to the right of shot here, which would be Muirhall House, which is, as I say, just to the right of that shot. Moving round to northeast of the application site, sorry, for the main listed building. This is the Gilgal building, which is in fact of some vintage, and is actually listed by virtue of being within the curtilage of the listed building. So it benefits from the category A listing by virtue of its curtilage. But as you can see there, and as the report refers to, it suffered extensively from fire damage and vandalism. It is in a severe state of disrepair. The proposal is to demolish this building, and as alluded to within the report, the principle of that demolition, given the state of the building, is accepted, but thought it important to highlight to you this particular building for that reason. This is the final still that I'll show. You'll notice within the report that objection is raised from our transport planning colleagues, and concerns are raised and within representation about the level of traffic already existing within the locality. This is a screenshot taken from traffic count studies commissioned by Transport Planning, so Perth Kinross Council, through the course of this planning application. So as you can see, the count there took place midway through April this year. This is representative of the AM peak traffic congestion that actually currently exists at the junction here, which is at Logie Brae, Muirhall Road, and as it leads, you can see the cars that move up the hill beyond towards Ganachie Road. And indeed, of the right of shot, whilst it's not evident, it's likely that some traffic would also be backing up on Muirhall Road itself. So this is just to give members who may not be familiar with the context of the existing traffic situation, empirical evidence essentially of the congestion that is visible on a daily basis on the AM peak hours. And this is taking members back to the proposed, albeit indicative, site layout plan for the in-principle application, but more specifically the proposals as they would be formed for in detail for the change of use planning application.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. So we'll proceed to deputation. Could I ask the first deputation to come forward? That's Mr. Fleming, who is an objector. Good morning, Mr. Fleming. You have 7 minutes to discuss both applications, and if you could remain there afterwards for any questions from members. Thank you. You'll also be given a minute warning when you have 1 minute left to go.
Okay, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to address this meeting. I speak as an objector to this planning application, and I've worked closely with the Bridgend Ganachie and Knoll Community Council on its content. While we should all look for a positive future for the old Murray Royal Hospital buildings, we must also ensure that we do not feel rushed into a bad decision. The applicant claims that the state of the old listed buildings mandates a swift solution, but the reality is that the buildings have stood for some 180 years and will continue to do so if kept watertight. Now, a major challenge for developing this site is the poor road infrastructure of the locality. That makes the applicant's transport assessment a key consideration, and today I'll take you through some of its many serious faults. Instead of using an up-to-date traffic survey, the applicant's traffic forecast is based on calculations from a 2015 base. Bewilderingly, the applicant's numbers differ quite a bit from those submitted by Ganachie Trust, allegedly using the same 2015 paramix base. The applicant's numbers are also significantly lower than the 2016 traffic survey conducted by Ryden. And in fact, the applicants' numbers are even lower than those submitted by McCarthy and Stone in 2013 for the Isla Road development. The upshot is that the applicant's transport assessment provides no credible representation of actual traffic congestion. Now, there are further remarkable and substantial errors in the applicant's case. Astonishingly, in tables 6.7, 6.8, and 6.9 of the transport assessment, you'll see that the applicant has omitted the traffic from Main Street onto Perth Bridge, omitted it, and deducted the estimated volume of Murray Royal Hospital traffic in their calculations, thereby contriving to produce a significant 42% understatement of traffic volumes. What's more, as well as using some questionable trip generation numbers, the submission also fails to incorporate traffic generated by local developments at St Mary's Monastery, Isla Road, and Gannachie Road. Now, the kind-hearted among you may say that everyone makes mistakes, but the local authority's transport planners identified issues in the transport assessment, and when they did so, the applicants simply failed to address them. It's informative that the applicant's reaction to the 2018 measured queue length of half a mile was either that it must be an isolated incident. Well, tell that to the locals, and you'll have seen in the submission from the Community Council photographs indicating the degree of traffic congestion. Or their other response was that traffic signals are not fully optimized. Now, and by saying this, they're actually acknowledging that congestion is greater than their submitted calculations, and so are demolishing their own case. So where does that leave us? What is the situation regarding traffic congestion and the consequent air pollution? Well, we do know that Ryden in 2016 measured saturation at Bridgend Cross at 91.2%. Now, 90% saturation is recognised in traffic planning as the maximum tolerable. Why is this? Well, queuing time depends on the level of saturation. The higher the saturation, the longer the queues. But the impact is not linear, though it's a persistent deceit of traffic consultants to imply that it is. At 90% saturation, statistical formulae tell us that a seemingly small increase of 5% actually doubles queue length and doubles queuing time. Note, by the way, that the applicant's calculation, itself incredibly underestimated, is that their proposal would produce a 5% increase in traffic, but that this will have, and I quote, a minimal impact upon the operation of the local road network, unquote. So in conclusion, our transport planners are quite correct when they say that this proposed development contravenes policy TA1B of the local development plan. The applicant has failed to produce meaningful and credible calculations and has thus failed to prove that the proposed development would not have a detrimental effect on the capacity or safety of the strategic road network. And I therefore ask that you refuse permission for this planning application. And one last comment on the phasing proposal that has come in at the last moment, just thinking about that. Let me point out that with regard to the effectiveness of the Cross-Tay Link Road, opinions are divided on how effective that will be in terms of its reduction of the congestion in Bridgend. I would say that the sensible approach for that is to wait until it's implemented, and when we can measure the impact it has, we can make a much more measured decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fleming. Members, are there any questions for Mr. Fleming? No? Thank you, Mr. Fleming. If I can now invite Mr. Littlejohn to come forward, please. again, you'll have 7 minutes to discuss the applications. And if you could remain there for any questions, and we'll give you a 1-minute warning just before the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Convener and Committee, for the opportunity to address you this morning. Thank you also to Mr. Fleming for his comments. I should apologise. My client or a client representative from Rivertree had intended on being at committee this morning to address you, but unfortunately, for personal reasons, hasn't been able to fly up. We act as agents for Rivertree Residential, and I've been involved with the development management team for a number of months, both pre-application and during the application discussions with the council's planning officers and others. We've sought to work with officers to help secure the long-term future of this nationally important Murray Royal Hospital, A-listed by HES. It's not my intention to speak for 7 minutes, you'll be pleased to hear, but I have a brief statement that I was keen to run through, which might pick up on a few of Mr. Fleming's points. However, happy, obviously, to answer any questions that you may have. Our client would welcome the council's support in delivering the refurbishment of the listed buildings and securing a future for the Murray Royal site. Importantly, Historic Environment Scotland are fully supportive of the proposals to convert the former hospital, and there have been very positive discussions, including with regards to the new residential in principle having taken place throughout. In that context, we are very disappointed to be speaking to you today in the shadow of 2 recommendations to refuse. The buildings are significantly deteriorating, as we've heard, with the Gilgal building now ruinous. Our clients are committed to secure the future of these buildings. There is indeed a pressing need to secure the future of the site and its nationally important listed buildings. The development before the council today is entirely consistent with your new local development plan, which has recently been submitted to Scottish Government. The application for detailed planning permission, as we've heard, relates to the change of use of the main listed buildings across the site, with an in-principle proposal for new housing sensitively cited, we believe, in its grounds. Fundamentally, the new housing is required to provide access to the funds needed for the refurbishment of the listed buildings, which you can appreciate are extremely costly. Our client is only seeking an in-principle decision on the new housing at this stage, and development of the new build will only happen following the refurbishment of the main building, and siting, design and other matters, in our minds, can be dealt with at a later date. As you appreciate, Rivertree Residential need the certainty of the new build element coming forward at a point in time such as the refurbishment of the main hospital building can be commenced. Rivertree could not expose themselves to a significant refurbishment cost unless they have certainty of the new build element coming forward in a certain timescale, both realistic and viable. Notwithstanding the reports before committee today, our client are sympathetic to concerns on traffic impact and have been in discussions with the council, as we've heard, on a phased approach to the delivery of the development of the site, which effectively delays the development of any new build at the site to a point in time in the future to allow us to proceed to refurbish a proportion of the main listed building. It's not mentioned in the report, but again, our client could be prepared to restrict development up to a period of 2021 to allow for the conversions at least to proceed. We had discussed with the council that this would then allow for future phases to come forward at a later date, and we have a view could be controlled by way of planning condition or Section 75 restrictions. These applications are presented to you this morning with a view to safeguarding the long-term future of the site. I don't agree with Mr. Fleming that we are making a rushed decision here. Indeed, we've been discussing the redevelopment of the Murray Royal site since it was sold a number of years back by the NHS. That period of time has been a very lengthy and ongoing discussion with the local authority. Even if you have concerns today on some of the matters in the officer's reports, which we believe are matters that can be dealt with by way of condition, it is open to you, the council, to approve either or both of these applications because of the special regard you must have to the preservation of the listed buildings. Happy, as I say, to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Littlejohn. Do we have any questions, Mr. Littlejohn? Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Vice Convener. Good morning. Thanks for your presentation. Traffic's a big issue here. Is there any explanation you can provide the committee with as to why, when the applicants were asked for a response on the traffic volumes and issues, and particularly the timing of the data that you provided, and were given the opportunity to re-comment on that, why there was no real response on that?
Certainly, Councillor, happy to respond. I don't profess to be a traffic and transportation consultant, as you'll appreciate. However, from my client's perspective, I've been personally involved in the discussions that we've had with the council over the course of the pre-application discussions and during the course of the consideration of the application. It's fairly obvious, and it's reflected in the report, that there is a disagreement with the council's transport planning team and my client on traffic and transportation issues. But I think it's quite telling, Ewan, that the council have used their own independent consultant, a company called Sistra, to assess the proposed development for the council. Ultimately, in the discussions that we've had, Sistra have taken the view that the traffic modelling has suggested that additional traffic demand associated with the proposed development will have an impact, albeit a slight impact, on the surrounding roads infrastructure. I should say that that's in the context of our client's consultants, a company called Arup, having completely scoped the assessment completely in line and in agreement with the council and Sistra. So all of the information that we've presented, we continue to maintain has been wholly agreed with the council and Sistra, but yet there continues to be this disagreement. And I think what we're saying is that we don't disagree that there will be additional traffic added to local junctions. However, it's considered that that is within acceptable parameters for a development of this type coming forward. I don't disagree. In fact, I've experienced the queues at Bridgend Junction. These queues do, however, clear, and traffic does flow through them. It is a city centre site ultimately and going forward. As I say, there is a disagreement, I think, between our consultants or consultants acting on behalf of my client and the council's transport planning team. And one of the things that we'd set forward, notwithstanding that disagreement, in light of our being sympathetic, I think, to local issues, was the suggestion of a phased approach to the delivery of the site. Our client fundamentally needs to be able to have an element of new build development at the Murray Royal to be able to support and fund the refurbishment of the listed buildings. I think everybody can see how that would work from an economics perspective. But what they're not saying is that they would want to see all of the site developed immediately and at the same time. And I think that's the key here, that ultimately there's a real opportunity for us to get on site and begin to redevelop and refurbish the main listed building at the Murray Royal, with a view to then having development restricted in some form or fashion to allow for it to be developed over the course of a period of time. And obviously, over the course of that passage of time, you will have developments locally, such as traffic junction improvements and the delivery of the Cross Tay, for example, in going forward. So sorry, probably a very long answer to a short question.
Do we have any further questions? Councillor Drysdale.
Thank you, Convener. Thank you, Mr Littlejohn. I wonder if I can just ask you to explain a little more fully the proposed phasing approach that you have, and just set out for committee the period over which you envisage this development taking place, and in particular the scale of the development in the years before the CTLR is up and running and indeed becomes a committed project.
Yeah, certainly, Councillor, happy to try and further clarify that. The nature of the discussions with the council planning officers to date and the transport planning team have been along the lines that the client would seek to deliver 50% of the refurbished units, so in the region of 25 to 30, up to a period of 2021-2022. That would give them the comfort ultimately that they could have the planning permission in principle sitting in the background. It would give them the comfort to allow them to proceed to develop with the refurbishment of the main building. The nature of that discussion's really yet to be sort of borne out in any huge amount of detail with the development management team. However, at that 2021-2022 date, we understand that Cross Tay is to be a committed form of development, and there could be a mechanism within the legal agreement to allow for then future phases to come forward. We should make it clear that the Murray Royal Hospital building itself is quite a complicated building. Our client's been quite upfront with the council in suggesting that with a fair wind even, they would probably be only able to deliver about 15 units within the Murray Royal building itself on a year-by-year basis. So they're suggesting that that's limited up to a period of 2021, and then you have a smaller proportion of development beyond that, as I say, in the context of having a PPP, which provides them comfort that in the future they can take forward a proposal for new residential development.
Any further questions from Mr. Littlejohn? No. Thank you, Mr. Littlejohn, for your deputation. Thank you for your time. We'll now open up for questions to officers. Do any members have any questions? Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Convener. There was it was intimated that the traffic light system is not optimised down at Bridgend. Has any the transport officers got any comments on that?
Good morning, committee. The lights have, as far as timings, have been changed a number of times over the years. I must admit that I'm not currently aware if there is any further capacity to optimise the lights, but I would imagine, given the existing congestion, that they are indeed optimised.
Can you indulge in another question?
Certainly.
To transport? A 5% increase doesn't sound a lot, but it's not the actual volume of traffic, it's the dispersal after it causes most of the time. Is that correct? But how longer would it take for an increase of 5% to disperse in that rush hour?
It's really dependent on a number of factors, including sort of road geometry, the knock-on effect with other lights and their timings, etc. So it can have a greater effect. A small increase can have a greater effect in certain locations.
Thank you. I think that's an answer.
Councillor Waters, do you have a question?
Thank you, Convener. Just in relation again to the traffic models and the phasing proposals that have been chatted about. The base, we were informed by Mr. Fleming that the base for the traffic model for the applicant's report that came in was 2015. Can I initially ask what the base data is for the model that was used by Sistra is?
It's the same.
2015. In relation to the potential of a phasing one, did with the Sistra model look at what the traffic would be like once the development was made and the Taylink Road was instigated?
That hasn't been covered by the traffic assessment that's been supplied by the applicant.
Right, thank you.
So I don't have the information to carry out such an assessment.
Thank you.
Councillor Inworth.
Thank you very much. I think the key thing for me is the Cross Taylink Road. What impact do you think the Cross Taylink Road, which is due to arrive in 2023, I think, what impact will that have on the Bridgend junction, and will that create enough capacity for this proposal to go ahead?
Indeed, it's in our response that once the Cross Taylink Road is operational, we would be comfortable with such a development coming forward, and that the modelling we show would create more than sufficient capacity to accommodate this development.
So is it true to say that there will be a gap between the houses being built and the delivery of the Cross Tay Road link, but that may only be a matter of 2 years?
Within the TEA, it has a 2019 as far as assessment for the development starting to come online. So potentially it could be up to a four-year gap potentially.
Thank you.
Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Vice Convener. My first question, and I've got one or two, is about contaminated land. obviously this was an active hospital until fairly recently, included such things as a boiler house, storage and other facilities, including catering facilities. Some of these are occupied, I think, by the new development. Do we know offhand what the risk analysis of contaminated land is?
We do. We've consulted our environmental health colleagues specifically on contaminated land, and they do recognise, given the former use of the site, that there is a potential risk. But at this point, we're recommending that we can proceed on the basis, if approval were to be granted, that you could condition that matter to undertake a necessary survey and secure any necessary remediation, but there's no fundamental issue with contaminated land.
Convener, my other question is a more general one. The reasons for refusal are given on page 52 of our papers, and there are 4 reasons. I just would like to ask Planning Service if they considered additional reasons for refusal on subjects such as layout, the boundary wall, landscaping, air quality and trees. Was any consideration given to individual reasons within these headings?
In reaching the recommendation that's before you, the 4 reasons specifically for the in-principle development, obviously we have the transport issues and to an extent the bat issues, which are common between both applications, but specifically for the in-principle, we have had regard to indicative layouts to ascertain and understand what the principal barriers to that development proceeding would be. In respect of the siting and design, yes, we do consider that the breaching of a boundary wall and the encroachment of development within key views of the principal elevation of the listed building, the main listed building, and also the removal of some trees to be unacceptable, and therefore that's why the reasons for refusal are framed as such. There are other concerns discussed in the report in terms of matters of perhaps encroachment on other trees or some uncomfortable relationships within other views of the listed building. However, we haven't sought that those in themselves are particular reasons for refusal, because they may otherwise have been something we could overcome. But the issues of unjustified removal of trees and an unqualified position in terms of saying that the development in that particular housing zone at the principal approach to the building, that isn't something we could feel we could overcome. So that's why the 2 reasons for refusal are framed in the way they are.
Right, Councillor Drysdale.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, this is a question which may, I think, be for Mr. Elliott. It's really to seek clarity on the Air Quality Management Areas Policy EP11, which states development proposals within or adjacent to designated air quality management areas which would adversely affect air quality may not be permitted. So there's no conditionality on that. Any adverse effect on air quality may result in a proposal not being permitted. On page 80 of the papers I'm looking at, the narrative on air quality, point 127, whilst some of the, most of the assessments are that the increase would be negligible, there is one receptor in Logie Bray which is deemed to have moderate increase, and this is slightly more concerning. So clearly I'm seeing in one part of the paper that there is anticipated to be a deterioration in air quality in certain locations, and I'm seeing a policy which does not allow development proposals where adverse air quality will occur. I'm just trying to understand why, therefore, the recommendation of refusal does not include reference to air quality.
I think, Councillor Drysdale, it's actually a question I can't really answer because it's all wrapped up in the assessment of air quality. You have to then match that to the wording EP11. I wouldn't be quite so literal in the sense of it does talk about adversely affecting, so you have to look at that, and it may not be permitted. So really, I think that question really has to be put across to look at the assessment, and it's a question that really has to put across to environmental health. I don't know if Mr Scott's got some comments.
Yeah, just as a prelude to that, you are correct that the policy is framed to seek to avoid adverse impact on air quality. They have undertaken an air quality assessment, and you're right, some impacts have determined to be in one particular location adverse. The report does detail why, however, we are able to say that the impacts are not so significant that would warrant a reason for refusal, and my colleague, Mrs Reid from Environmental Health, could perhaps speak further to that. Just in advance of saying that there are still concerns about construction dust, which is obviously an element of air quality, and we do say that could be addressed through a further detailed construction management plan. But in terms of the principle, Mrs Reid can answer that for us.
Yeah, my colleague who reviewed the air quality management area took into consideration the other factors as well, that was a moderate impact, and mostly PM 2.5 concentrations are made up of background as well. He also took into consideration over the next 4 years the fleet improvement emissions from vehicles, and he also took into consideration the cross-tail link.
But for clarity, would you agree that excuse me, the existing level of air pollution in that location is already too high, and it's an issue that we need to seek to address by whatever means we can?
The main hotspot area is the canyon effect, and that's where we have our exceedances in PMs and nitrogen dioxide. The background level will fluctuate, but PM 2.5 is mostly made up of background. So if you were to take an area where the background level is already predominantly high, and you then have no development there whatsoever, then development would never go ahead in lots of areas. So from an air quality assessment, we take, although there's an air quality management area, it does not determine that development should not go ahead within that area. What is determined is that we should do a full air quality assessment to deem what the emissions that development will be in comparison without that being there, the development being there, and look at the significance of that. So therefore, the significance is moderate in this aspect, so therefore we deemed that development could go ahead.
Thank you.
Mr. Illingworth, Councillor Illingworth, sorry.
Thank you, Convener. It seems to me that Cross-Tay Link Road is going to be pretty important to this. Does that mean, and that the Cross-Tay Road link will in itself generate improvements at Bridgend, does that mean in the meantime, until Cross-Tay Link Road is built, we are refusing permissions for everywhere along the A93 and A94 that feed into Bridgend?
It's not the case that's happening. For other sites, indeed, the committee have considered more recently, there have been some phasing approaches, because those approaches have either been embedded within the allocation of the site themselves, or the transport assessments that have been submitted with those applications have been able to sufficiently demonstrate that a phased approach would be appropriate. As alluded to, however, by my colleague Mr Salmon from Transport Planning, we don't have a phasing approach which has been modelled and calculated through the transport assessment that we have. While some phasing has been indicated by the applicant's agent here today, we have sought on a number of occasions, and the report makes reference to, we're trying to understand how that would work even if it was the listed building or part thereof, but we don't have that. So we've reached the conclusion that the application be recommended for refusal on that basis, whereas other sites, they have been able to demonstrate adequately that the phased approach would be appropriate.
Thank you very much.
Do we have any other questions? Councillor Robertson.
Yes, could I ask a question, Mr Salmon, again? With regard to the traffic modelling that's taken place at Bridgend, which we all know is congested, was there any, when you were doing the modelling, was there anything you noticed that could be done to the way the traffic flows, or additional work that could be done there to actually improve the congestion there, which might, if we got a developer contribution, might help towards the problems that we all know exist there?
The answer is the Crosstail Link Road. Essentially, there's nothing locally there which will significantly open up capacity to allow such developments to proceed. So no, we haven't looked at any other sort of more local alternatives.
Do we have any further questions? No? Thank you. So we'll now move to the debate stage, and at this point we'll now look at each application in turn. So we are now dealing first of all with, in our papers, 511, that is the residential development in principle of up to 70 dwellings at the former Muirhall Hospital, Muirhall Road, Perth. Comments from any members at all, first of all? Any comments? Councillor Wilson.
Convener, this has been an interesting discussion, and the information that we've had in the last hour, I think, has helped me form an opinion on what we ought to do. I'm going to move a motion for deferral of the application, and I do so for three principal reasons. One is I think the committee would benefit from a site visit. This is one of the most significant sites in the city of Perth. As we'd see from the main building, it's, I would use the word stunning, and I think that efforts need to continue to keep that wind and watertight, but also redevelop it. It won't be an easy one to do, as I think Mr. Littlejohn referred to, because it in fact has a history that doesn't make it easy to convert, to be quite blunt. However, I think it would benefit all of us to have a site visit, both in terms of the conversion and also the new development within the parkland surrounding it. Secondly, I think we need to come to we'll have a standoff with the developer about traffic. They've already been asked by Planning Service to provide additional information or respond to what our quite significant data is on traffic movements, linked both to the studies that have been done around Bridgend and the consequences of the new road, the North Link Road. So I think that matter needs further discussion. I think also the Burness Paul letter raises a number of issues that both on transport but also on heritage and biodiversity that need at least clarification, if not further discussion. And finally, Vice Convener, I think phasing has been mentioned several times. I think it's unfortunate it was introduced during the debate as a serious issue, but I think that it's one that further consideration ought to be given to. And until I think these matters are further examined and or resolved, I think making a decision today might be premature. So I move the deferral for these reasons.
Do we have a second to the motions? Councillor Robertson.
I'm happy to second Councillor Wilson's motion for deferral. I think that's the most sensible way to go forward, because there are quite a number of unanswered issues here. I was taken by the comments of Mr. Fleming about the traffic. I think we really need to have firm answers on that, and I think if we defer it, we'll have more likelihood to know what's going to happen with the Tay Cities deal, which is another issue which we hope to get resolved soon, and that will give us an indication when and if the Cross-Tay Link Road will be actually put in place. So a deferral, I think, is a good way forward.
Mr. Elliott, is that confident? We're happy to go?
I think we need to be quite clear on the terms of the deferral, but also I think I would also want to invite comments from planning on, because they would have to deal with the deferral, of course. What I've got at the moment, Councillors Wilson and Robertson, is to defer for a site visit. Now, is that to be accompanied or unaccompanied? Unaccompanied, so it would just be councillors going and being okay. So it wouldn't be accompanied by applicants. Wouldn't be accompanied by applicants and objectors. The second Bear in mind, at the moment, we're actually only dealing with the in principle. Second aspect, I felt, Councillor, that the way I heard it is your second ground, your fourth ground was kind of overlapping, perhaps the same, but defer for further discussions and information on traffic issues, including phasing. Right, detach the phasing from the traffic, okay. So that would be the second ground. The third ground to defer would be for clarification on the issue, further clarification and possible further discussion on the issues raised in the Burness-Paul letter. And fourthly, further consideration of the phasing of the site, of the development. Potential, yes. Okay. Yes. Any amendment?
Can I ask, do we have an amendment? No? Okay. Councillor Barnacle.
Could I add a point in, convener? One of the things in the report that comes out is in relation to the protection of trees and the current transport access and consideration of another one. So although the Burness-Paul letter doesn't refer to trees, I think that is also an issue that requires clarification. If that could be added to the deferral request, then I would be content.
Vice Convener, I'm more than happy to include trees and tree management issues within any deferral.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Can I take it we all... Oh, sorry, Councillor Gray.
I do feel out of sympathy for this building and the owner of this building, which is a listed and important building, that it would be remiss of us to make a hasty decision on other than deferral in this one, just because the responsibilities of maintaining the building can only accrue as time goes by, and if we delay this for a number of years, perhaps unnecessarily, but perhaps necessarily, it's important that we do defer and make sure we make the right decision. Thank you.
Can I take it then we're all in agreement for a site visit? Great. Thank you. Now proceed to 512, which is again the change of use of alterations, selective demolition of former hospital buildings to form 58 flats and associated works at Murray Royal. Am I to take it that the same applies? Councillor Wilson.
Vice Convener, I know we need to deal with this formally and I don't want to prevent any member of the committee asking questions. I had one or two already, but given the unanimous decision that we've made regarding 511, I would formally move paper 512 for the same reasons. Perhaps the tree reasons is less important in terms of the 512, but I would leave the trees in because they're part of the overall landscape.
Second, Councillor Roberts. Councillor Roberts, second. So members, that's both papers now dealt with. We are deferring for a site visit on both. We now proceed to paper 513, which is to do with the erection of 11 dwelling houses, garages and associated works of matters specified in conditions. This is land south of 8, the Beeches, Aberfeldy. And Mrs. Conliffe will introduce the report.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Excuse me. This first shot shows the phasing plan for the development. Members will recall we've had this application, this site discussed fairly recently at committee. Phases 1 and 2 have already been granted, and phase 1, the affordable, which is your purple in sort of north, to the right-hand side of the screen is the affordable housing which is currently under construction at the moment. To the south of that, the light blue colour was phase 2, which has been granted by members. And the application that we have before us today is the yellowy colour in the centre of the screen, which is for the 11 houses. This shows this larger scale version of that yellowy area for the proposed 11 units. It's a sloping site, so that it's been developed to take account of that. There are walls that are required to go in as part of it. The design is very similar, quite a contemporary design to the other sites that have been granted, both phase 1 and phase 2. This is just showing an aerial view from the south looking across the site. So the lower level of properties that you see at the front of the screen there is the current proposal, and the two-storey ones that you see just a bit further north into the site is the affordable housing, and as I say, most of that is well under construction at the moment. And back again to show the layout of the proposed 11 units.
Thank you, Mrs. Conliffe. Any questions? We have no deputations. Any questions for officers? No? Then we'll go to debate. Any comments?
Move the report.
The report. We have a motion to approve. Yeah, agree. Thank you. We are now dealing with application 521. Part demolition of buildings, erection of 2 new dwelling houses and 4 flats and associated works at Kirklands Garage, 10 High Street, Kinross. I'll ask Mr. Niven to introduce.
Thank you, Convener. I have 2 updates to make first to the report. The first update relates to condition 7. We're seeking to update that and reword it, so in effect, this relates to the cycle parking, I should say. We are proposing that it should be reworded to prior to the occupation of the first flat. That's in order to ensure that it's related directly to the flats, because the house at the front might come forward first. The second update relates to the conditions within the report. There are a number of errors in the referencing under a number of the paragraphs. The first paragraph is under paragraph 75. It refers to conditions 7 and 8. It should be 8 and 9. Paragraph 84, it refers to condition 9 and it should be 10. Paragraph 85, it refers to condition 10 and it should be 11. And paragraph 92, where it refers to condition 11, it should be 12. Moving on to the site itself. Yeah, this application relates to the site of the former Kirklands Garage, located within the centre of Kinross on the High Street. At the front of the site stands a traditional 2-storey building with the original forecourt and canopy still present, but the buildings are visibly in a poor state of repair. To the rear of the site, which is accessed via a small pend through the property at the front, stands a cluster of large steel workshop buildings, again in varying states of disrepair. This is the layout of the proposed development. Full plan permission has been sought to redevelop the site to form 2 dwelling houses and 4 new build flats. The existing traditional building at the front of the site will be partially retained and extended to form 2 dwelling houses, whilst the structures to the rear of the site will be demolished to allow for the construction of an L-shaped 2-storey block containing 4 new build flats. The alterations and extensions to the traditional building are of a contemporary design, but reflective of the character of the original building, whereas the proposed new flatted block to rear is of a more contemporary affair featuring a mixture of modern materials. This first photograph is taken looking from the High Street at the traditional building in the frontage. As you can see, you can still see the original canopy of the forecourt. The element of the building that will be retained is the main element behind the canopy, whereas the side extension with the pen, that will be demolished as part of the development. This is a view looking from the neighbouring property. It's the front garden of Leavenbank, which is 12 High Street. As you can see there, you can see the building which contains the penned access into the rear of the site just on your your right-hand side there. As you can see in the roof, the building is in quite a very poor state of repair, and almost the entire apex of that roof is devoid of any tiles. Moving backwards into the site, you can see just beyond the wall the existing structures and workshop buildings that were associated with Kirklands Garage to the rear. This photograph, again taken from the rear garden of the neighbouring property at Levenbank, a view along the wall with the proposed development. That wall is proposed to be retained, with the development taking place behind that wall. Again, a view from the new build development on the old high school site. Looking from the west towards the site, you can see the neighbouring property at Levenbank on the right-hand side, and the large steel buildings to the rear of the site are visible within the centre of the site to the left. And this is a view from the rear of the old high school buildings that are currently being converted. The containers on the right-hand side are the offices for the existing ongoing development there. Behind that, you can see the extent of the buildings there, the interface, if you like, between that site and the new site and the rear of the high school buildings that are being converted. And we return back to the location plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Niven. We have two deputations to hear. Could I invite Mr. Mullen to come forward first of all, please? Thank you, Mr. Mullen. You have 5 minutes to speak, and we'll give you a warning when there's just 1 minute left to go. And if you could stay where you are for questions afterwards. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So I've lived with my family at Levenbank for the last 19 years, which is just next to, as the council officer said, just next to the proposed site. Nobody in Kinross would be more delighted with this, with an appropriate development of the existing garage. What I would like to say, though, is that I don't believe that this is an appropriate development in its current state. I think that there are some changes that need to be made to the site before it becomes an appropriate development. The site is right at the heart of the conservation area in Kinross. It's just over the road from the county buildings, which is arguably the second most significant listed building in Kinrossshire, apart from Kinross House. So it's really important that we get this right. The proposal is to effectively build a modern block of flats 1 metre away from a 200-year-old building in a conservation area. There are a number of significant issues with this in terms of my building and the conservation area. Viewed from the high street, it will look as though my house has been annexed by a modern block of flats. I don't believe that this is an appropriate development for the site. The other issue that I have with the flats that are right next to to my house is that they're 1 metre away from my garden. Hopefully, I've sent you all a little picture of what a superimposed picture of what those flats will look like. You've seen the picture of the back garden. They're 1 metre away from the garden. There are 6 windows at the top level of the garden. 2 of the windows look directly onto the garden. They're within the recommended 9 metre distance that a council guidance that says that windows of new developments must be 9 metres or should be 9 metres away from neighbouring properties. 6 of the windows are covered. The windows are covered either with an opaque finish or a spandrel panel. The purpose of a window is to let in light. My question is, why have the developers covered the windows over? I've done a little Google search on what a spandrel panel is. Apparently, it's a construction mechanism that's used for panelling on walls. The Google search could not come up with, despite its significant technological search abilities, couldn't come up with a significant reason of why a developer would want to put a panel in front of an installed window. My view is that that window will not be covered in the future. That will mean that I will have 6 windows at their closest point, 1 metre away from my garden, looking directly onto my garden. So the other points that I would like to raise are that I've read the council officer's report. I would disagree with the statement that with regard to residential amenity. I don't believe that this proposed development protects my residential amenity. Secondly, I would like to mention that I don't think that it complies with the placemaking policy that's in the document. I also don't think it complies with the conservation area.
So you have a minute left, sir.
Sorry,
you have a minute left.
All right, great. Thanks. Good. I'm just about finished. I don't think it complies with the conservation area policy either. What I would like to suggest is that, like I said, I don't have an issue with the development per se. I do have an issue with the development in its current form. I'd like to suggest to the councillors that they do a site visit to see the site and to see its significance. If that's not possible, then I would like to suggest that the elected members refuse the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mullen. If you can just stay there. Any questions for Mr. Mullen? Councillor.
Thank you. Could you give me any evidence, or give us any evidence, to your claim that the developer will not maintain these lower sections of the windows? I do understand in the application that the upper section of the window will be clear, but the lower section wouldn't. They would be covered with whatever materials you were talking about to ensure that you could not see through them. Any evidence? Can you give any evidence to, other than your own opinion?
So the top level windows, okay, are the ones that are covered with the spandrel panel. Okay, the top level windows are the ones that are covered with a spandrel panel. So what I would suggest is that I know in the council officer's report they've suggested that there'll be a planning restriction that makes sure that they maintain this panel in front of the window, but I think that is completely unenforceable. So do I have any evidence? There will be obviously a significant financial incentive for the developers to remove that panel. Do I have any evidence that they will definitely do it? No. Do I think they will do it? I think they will, yes. I think that those panels will be removed at some stage.
Any further questions? Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Vice Governor. Thanks for your presentation, Mr. Mullen. On the diagram you gave to us, I think we've all agreed there's an L-shaped proposal. Some of that L shape will be further away from your garden, right? Is that where the opaque windows, I'm not sure for the spangle windows, but the opaque windows will be?
No, the windows are the one. So it's the development that is to the west of the development. It's those are the windows that will be covered by opaque and spandrel panels. So if you look at the west of the development there, so this is my garden. Right at the left here, this is my garden. The flats that are to the west of the development, the upper level of those flats will have 8 windows. 2 of them are clear glass that look straight onto the garden. 6 of them, there are 6 other windows. 2 of them have an opaque finish. These are bathrooms, I don't have an issue with that. I do have issues with the 4 windows that have spandrel panels on them. I don't believe, like I say, I don't believe that those windows, I don't believe it's possible to maintain or to enforce a policy that says a window must have a panel in front of it. Why install the window in the first place? Why go to the expense?
Okay, just to clarify my understanding,
Yeah.
on that plan that's just
Yeah.
above your head, the L-shaped bit, the long left-hand side there,
Yeah.
how many windows are overlooking your property in
So
that
there's
section?
8 windows that look, so the top level has 8 windows, the bottom level has 8 windows as well.
Yep.
The top level has 8 windows, 2 of them are clear glass. The other 6 are covered. They're covered with either an opaque finish or a spandrel panel.
Right, and the 2 clear glass ones
Mhm.
are the ones that are very close to your boundary
Well,
wall.
no, the 2 clear glass ones are the ones on the stairwell. So they're about 5 metres away from the boundary. The ones that are covered are within 1 metre of the boundary.
Okay, thank you.
So if they're uncovered, they will look, within 1 metre, they'll look directly onto the boundary, onto the garden.
Any further questions? Councillor Waters?
Thank you. Can I just ask for a little bit of clarification? One of your submission that came in, you have a view from the window of the north elevation of Levenbank.
Yeah.
Is that a window that's in the gable end of your house?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yes. So this is the main building of my house, and it has a window that will look directly at the new flats. It will look directly at the new flats. I've taken a picture in my objection, and that view will be completely obscured by the new flats. So there's an overlooking and loss of light issue there too.
Right, thank you.
Councillor Barnacle?
Yeah. Morning, Jed. You've mentioned residential amenity and privacy and the conservation issue. In your letter to the members of the committee, you also mentioned parking.
Yes, yeah.
Because I think paragraph 82 of the report states that parking provision doesn't meet the National Roads Development Guide. Would you concur with that, and would you say that as a resident of Kinross, parking is a real issue on the high street there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've taken some photographs in my objection. So this is the proposal is to create 6 3-bedroom properties in this space here. There are 9 parking spaces. The idea that a 3-bedroom property in a rural town like Kinross only needs 1 parking space is not realistic. So that will force the families that move into these properties to have to find parking space for the 2nd car or 3rd car possibly. On the high street, and I think even in the council officers' pictures, you'll see that the high street is almost always completely full with cars. It's over the road from the courthouse, which is a restaurant. It's a really busy area of town. Trying to find a parking space will be extremely difficult for these residents.
Councillor Jarvis?
Yes, Mr. Mallon, I'm going to ask for your opinion here. You talked about the windows and how they're overlooking your property. Do you think there is a way that could possibly be screened other than these, opaque windows and the various other things?
I don't see the point in going to the expense of installing a window and then covering it up. Why would you do that? So just don't have the window in the first place. That would be my position. I don't think the flats that are to the west of the development work on a conservation level, on a privacy level, on an overlooking level. What would be far better would be for the developers to move the development of those properties towards the north of the site. You could increase the size of the flats to the north of the site. You'd be able to make better utilisation of the ground there. It would resolve the parking problem that the site has, and it wouldn't be an overdevelopment of the site.
Okay, so basically then you're saying that there's no way of screening, a fence or whatever?
I don't believe you can have, and I don't believe that for the flats to the west of the development, I don't believe that there's any way that you can have windows that won't look onto my garden. But like I say, if you move them to the north of the site, it would work.
Any further questions? Thank you, Mr. Mullen. Thank you for your time this morning. Could I now ask Mr. Gray to come forward on behalf of the applicant? Mr. Gray, you have again 5 minutes, and we'll give you a warning when you have 1 minute left to go, and maybe questions afterwards.
Okay, thanks very much, Vice Convener, for the opportunity to present to the committee. It's rather unfortunate that we have to actually present to committee, given you've got a recommendation for approval for this application. There have been several attempts by the developer applicant to come up with a scheme that is acceptable to both the planning authority and to a number of objectors who had expressed their concerns. So this is not the first time this planning proposal has come before the council, and the applicant has worked very hard to try and resolve a lot of these issues, as you'll see in the officer's report. Myself, I'm not an architect, I'm a town planning consultant. I certainly don't purport to believe Mr. Mullen himself is an architect, although we respect his views. He's a local neighbour. I think the first point to make, though, is a private view is not a planning issue. Quite a number of other points we'd like to raise, just really the 5 minutes the objector has had here. In terms of privacy and light, yes, these are planning issues, and you'll see from the proposal that quite a number of these matters had been resolved. First of all, the application was 8 flats. We're now down to 6, so the height of the buildings have been significantly reduced. Furthermore, the 2 properties to the front are restoring an old building, which itself, as you can see from the photographs, is in a very poor state of repair. So there's also a viability issue from the applicant's point of view of delivering a scheme that works both for Kinross and for the area, but also in terms of making the development happen itself. In terms of some of the detailed points that were raised by the objector, some of these that he's raised, again, I'll just because of taking notes, I might be slightly haphazard here. In terms of the distance, he claimed there was 1 metre between his own property and the proposal. Our understanding that's 6 metres, and that's from gable to gable. Yes, we do agree that it's 1 metre to his garden. Again, the right of a private view in a garden is not a planning matter. The comments he raised about the spandrel panel, I want to make it quite clear, a spandrel panel is not neither nor a window, it's a design element of the building itself. It's a cover, it's a facade. So there's actually a solid wall behind the spandrel panel. It's not a window. In terms of the points that were asked about, can the planning condition be enforced in terms of the use of opaque windows? Well, of course it can. It's a planning condition. If the developers wanted to challenge that, I'm sure they would in their own time look to challenge that. Again, it's up to planning authority to decide whether that's something they want to accept or not. But as the proposal would stand, if it were approved today, the applicants would undertake to abide by the planning condition as would be law. In terms of the windows, again, to the windows, I think again the objector answered quite a number of the points for himself. The windows on the stairwell, for example, are just that. They're stairwells. They're not rooms that are inhabitable. Finally, you'd asked for a site visit. Again, you've heard this morning another application, a major application, which has quite significant effects for Perth and its area. This is an application, as I said, has been running for over a year. The objector has had 3 attempts. As he has quite rightly done, has made comments on the application. The officer himself has been out for a site visit and has also been into the objector's own property to look at the issues from that side of the fence, as it were. So we feel it'd be fruitless to have a site visit, given the urgency to have the building itself quite significantly addressed before it itself falls down and becomes a safety hazard for people in Kinross. So I commend to you the application and ask that you please take the officer's recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. Do we have any questions for Mr. Gray? Councillor Gray.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gray, was it? There is still vagueness in my mind, anyway, regarding these elongated windows with an opening window at the top and this spangled panel. Please describe a wee bit further, if you could, please.
As I said, I'm not an architect. The spandrel panel, as I said, is an architectural feature, so it adds variety and an interest to the building itself. It would be non-removable as such. It would leave a large space behind it because there's a wall actually behind the spandrel panel. So it is a feature rather than a functional window. It will not, in my view, cause any detriment to either design nor to public amenity.
So it's simply an external feature on a solid wall, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, and thanks for your presentation. We've had admittedly from Mr. Milner, here's what it might look like diagram. And did you consider when, and I'm taking this as being a reasonable representation based on the plans that have been submitted, presumably, when you looked, it looks to me as if the building's not entirely in sympathy with the existing building in the High Street. Now that's referred to in the report, and the planner has a different view which says that it's good to have a mixture and a variety, and this is different, and it's meant to be different. I understand that, but the height and massing of the building seems to be fairly excessive in terms of how it relates to the existing house in the High Street, never mind Mr. Mullen's house and his garden as well. Did you consider, in design terms, and I know you're not an architect, but did the architect consider having something that was a bit more in sympathy with the surrounding traditional type of building?
I think, yes, quite rightly. I'm not an architect, so I'll try my best. The applicants are here. They can add additional comments to that if need be. My view on life is the building itself, yes, traditional, stone built, it's in very poor condition. When they first looked at the condition of the building, there is a very large risk that the whole building could fall down. So effectively, you could have an architect looking at a completely blank canvas, looking at an entirely new proposal on an entirely flat piece of ground. You'll see the architects have looked to incorporate the old building into the traditional, the modern, contemporary, new parts of the building. So that would be my answer. Is it's a very good attempt to bring together old and new. It's actually been commended by the Kinross Civic Trust, who themselves had commented on the application previously. And you'll see from the officer's report, he's content with the design itself.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Thank you, Mr. Gray. Thank you for your time this morning. We'll now open up questions for officers. Do we have any questions for officers? Councillor Barnacle.
I've got a number of questions for officers, Vice Convener. First of all, do we have a conservation officer present?
No, we don't.
No. It is my understanding that the initial assessment was that the impact on Levenbank would be particularly overbearing, and also the contemporary design, materials and flat roof line are not in keeping with the conservation area, but the paragraphs in the report 63, 64, 66 to 68 don't appear consistent with this. So I'm wondering why that initial assessment has been adjusted, shall we say, in the report. That's the first question. The second question is relating to paragraph 70 and 71, which I believe reinforce concerns on privacy raised by Jed. I'm still confused as to why we have so many windows required here and why they have to be opaque, and this spandrel panel, I've never come across it before. So it's been raised as to whether the conditions relative are enforceable on a change of ownership. So that's something that's been raised by the objector, so I'd like a response on that.
So, Councillor Barnacle, could we just get those two questions answered first, else we'll might lose track.
Thank you.
Yes, in regards to the design, I take it your reference to the officer's view and our view essentially is that it's different to your own in the sense that you believe it's not appropriate, whereas obviously we do consider it's appropriate.
Yeah.
We consider that the design is acceptable and feel that's evident in the sectional plans submitted. I take reference to the fact that a concern has been raised about the traditional building at the frontage and competing element with the more contemporary design. The building is contemporary, it's not extreme by any imagination. It does have varying different roof angles, adds interest with the type of materials that are being used. And as outlined in the officer's report, it's not always the case that just because it's a conservation area, it doesn't always have to be a pastiche or a traditional design. It can sometimes be of a contemporary design, which we consider as acceptable in this application. I should also state that we also feel that the house at the front will remain the main focal principal element. Quite often when we're looking at plans, we're looking at in a bird's eye kind of situation, whereas when you're actually on the ground and walking past the frontage of the site, you'll be looking through. There are several examples of that in Kinross, where larger buildings at the rear are situated and the buildings at the front, Kinross Town Hall being one of them, is a large flat building at the back. That works quite well. The main principal element is further forward of that. So we are quite comfortable with the proposals as submitted in terms of the design. Moving on to the residential amenity, referring to the use of opaque panels first. The opaque panels are on the upper level are solely for bathroom windows. So it would be only anticipated that that would be retained by anybody in those flats, or in that flat, should I say. So it's singular, it's one flat. And the spandrel panels, as referred to by the agent, is usually used as to cover up a structural element of a building, but to retain from the exterior the effect of the windows. So you'll see it on a number of flatted blocks of larger scales or office buildings where you may have a bank of windows and you want to retain that element of the design and continuity, so you install a spandrel panel to cover up a breeze block wall or a structural member. In this case, they are choosing to install that as a more structural element to ensure that that is retained. And then they're having hoppers, if you like, above to allow light in to that room. But what also has to be borne in mind is that upper floor window arrangement, that lounge also has a bank of windows looking into the courtyard, so it's dual aspect. So the argument that these are critical for that room, they're actually more about allowing light in at an upper level, but they do have a view out on the other side. So I don't think they're critical in nature to say that any resident that would come in there would seek to remove them. But even if they did decide to remove them, there isn't a window there in the lower panels. There is no window, just to make that clear. They would actually have to remove that entire spandrel panel and install windows in its place, which is a much more significant job than removing an opaque panel out of a bathroom window. But as outlined in the report, we are satisfied that the conditions outlined are sufficient to ensure that they are retained in perpetuity.
Yeah. Okay.
You have a supplementary question?
I've got two more questions. Paragraph 82 notes parking provision does not meet with the National Roads Development Guide. Since parking is a problem on the streets of the immediate area, are roads officers satisfied with the proposed provision? And the other question is, paragraph 52 refers to structural risk to neighbouring properties as being a civil matter. Surely in allowing a proposal that could lead to such a civil matter, we should try to avoid that. So I'm just wondering about those. And my final point is, if I was to move deferral for more clarity on the proposals in relation to its fit to a conservation area and the neighbouring residents' concerns, would that be competent?
I think I'll attempt to answer the first 2 points. I think the third point of the competency of which decision you make is a later point, not necessarily for me to answer. In terms of car parking, as outlined in the report, the Transport Officer considers that the level of parking, albeit below, is acceptable. But Mr. Salmon, probably better placed to comment on that.
Yes, the National Roads Development Guide you refer to, it refers to maximum or appropriate levels of parking. It does not refer to minimum levels of parking. And contained within it is the provision for consideration of a reduction in the levels of parking that it suggests if such a development is within desirable walking distances to local amenities and has access to suitable public transport, which it is my view that this is indeed the case with this development.
Mr. Elliott, could I just ask you about the competency?
Difficult to say yes or no, Councillor Barnacle, in the sense of you'd probably need a bit more detail in terms of specifics as to what you were deferring for. And that's always my comments on a deferral. Be quite clear what you're looking for and what it's going to achieve.
Do we have any further questions for officers? Then we'll move to debate. Are there any comments to be raised on this application? No. Then could I ask if we could have a motion, please? Councillor Gray.
Could I suggest that we approve this application subject to the amendments given by Mr. Niven in the conditions? I think Mr. Mullen should be satisfied, I certainly am, that the removal of these spandrel panels, which are a key issue, would require approval from building services anyway, and I just don't think they would ever happen. I'm happy, content with the application. I think the retention of the frontage is satisfactory to maintain the conservation aspect, and whatever is happening back there is of minimal consequence. Thank you.
Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Anderson. Thank you. Do we have an amendment? Councillor Barnacle.
Well, I'm unhappy with elements of the report. I think this is a particularly sensitive development in Kinross, in the High Street, in the conservation area. I welcome the fact that something needs to happen there to the old garage, and there's no objection to the principle of development. I just think it could have been a better fit than what we've got at the moment. I'm reluctant to move refusal. I think there's a possibility for an amendment, and I think in order to achieve that, a site visit would be helpful to members for the reasons that have been outlined in the objector's representation. We could have a look at this. It's all very well looking at it in a letter. It's much better to see it on the ground in relation to the application and the effect. So, and I would want it to be an accompanied site visit as well.
I would just like to make the point that there is concern about members going for site visits on applications. It's always been made very clear that members should be looking to visit sites prior to committee. Now, on the first application at Muirhall, it was a different story. There was a whole load of things that are required. But I would be concerned if we were going to be coming to every committee and looking for a site visit. We've made it very clear with the stills that we've shown as well, the photographs, if people weren't aware of it, if they haven't had an opportunity to visit the site. Clearly, all the officers, both the case officer and the officers here, have visited the site in terms of preparing our recommendation here. If you have concerns about the design, then I would suggest you should be going with an amendment for refusal rather than deferral. You're looking for some changes, and you would see in the report we have already had a number of amendments. We've had schemes withdrawn and resubmitted, and a decision has to be made on what has been submitted by the applicant as part of this application. So my suggestion and advice would be not to go for a site visit and a deferral, but if you're not satisfied with the motion of approval and our recommendation of approval, that your amendment should be one of refusal.
Take after a bit more narrow approach, Councillor Barnago. I think there is an issue with your deferral motion in the sense of, as I understand it, you're looking for a site visit for members to visit, look at, but also to look at potential amendments. Now that's something which the purpose of a site visit for members is, or they're not commonly done, that is very true, but it's for members to understand the application to be able to take a decision, not to make amendments, because amendments are very much for the applicant to put forward an application to be assessed by officers and presented in the report. It's never been the role of members to, if you like, come up with amendments, however desirable that might be. You know, that's not been the role of members. Members have been asked to make a decision, so I do have concerns about your on the competency of the deferral for that purpose.
Okay. Well, I would say that the previous deferral on the large site was exactly for that reason, but that's just an objective view. In that case, I would like to move refusal of the application. And I would mention the policies, but before we go into anything further, I'd like to know if I mention the policies, before we get into anything further on that, I would like to know whether anybody supports what I'm proposing, because the policies I'm saying it is contrary to are PM1A, RD1, TA1B and HE3A, but fundamentally HE3A. But, you know, it may not be necessary to get in debate. I don't know whether I have any support on it.
Just take Councillor Barnacle at the moment. I think I can perhaps guess where you're going to go under the reasons, but we would need to flesh those out in terms of not just the policy, but really the reasons as to why you were looking for refusal. I don't know if you want to do that now. Normally it's done now, but you may be correct. If you don't have any tentative support, then it wouldn't be worth proceeding with that.
Members can ask then, would there be a seconder? Potential seconder, I should say, yes. Councillor Wilson.
Because I've already expressed concern about the design, I would be a potential seconder to test the meeting.
Thank you. Mr. Elliott.
I think, Councillor Barnacle, we need to come back to the details of what your amendment would be. I mean, you started off at PM1A and RD1, which I'm suspecting is kind of amenity grounds, but you need to be quite clear what they are, because you've heard reps. I don't know if you're talking about privacy and overlooking, but you do have information in the report. TA1B, I'm going to guess, is parking.
My point there is that I don't believe the development proposed would contribute positively to the quality of the surrounding built and natural environment, respecting the character and meaning of the place. It is my view that this proposal as it stands doesn't respect policy PM1A.
Insofar, getting PM1A out, Councillor Barnacle. So far what we have is contrary to policy PM1A as does not contribute positively to the surrounding built and natural environment, but you still need to say why. What aspect of this development causes a difficulty with this particular policy?
I think it's...
There's not been any mention of the front building, so I'm taking, is it correct you're really referring to the flats at the back?
It's the flats, it's the flats at the back. It's the massing and the flat roof design as well. And I don't think the contemporary design that's proposed fits as it is proposed in relation to the two front buildings, which I'm happy with.
So what I've got is, for first ground reviews, old cottage policy, PM1A, not contribute positively to the surrounding built natural environment due to the, firstly, the massing of and the flat roof of the flats to the flatted buildings to the rear. And secondly, due to the contemporary design not fitting the area.
Yeah.
Now, you've also mentioned policy RD1.
Yeah, that's basically, it says residential amenity will be protected and where possible improved. Small areas of private space will be retained. I think that's to do with the amenity of neighbouring residents. I don't see how the proposal improves that situation as it is structured at the moment.
Again, what aspect of residential amenity are you alluding to? Your previous ground is talking about the massing and etc. But residential amenity covers quite a lot of issues.
It's about overlooking of private space, basically.
So it's flatted building to the rear of the proposed development would overlook private amenity space. Now, I'm sorry, I forget the name. Are you specifically referring to the gentleman's property or a wider aspect?
I'm simply referring to the neighbouring property at the moment.
Can you remind me what it is at local?
Leavenbank.
Leavenbank, sorry.
Yeah.
Now, you refer to TA1B?
Yeah, that's about the parking provision, basically. It's the development proposal should provide safe access and appropriate car parking. I think what's not being acknowledged here is the lack of parking in the immediate street and the problems with parking in the immediate street. And if we're going to provide parking that's below the level of the standard, we could create more parking, which would change that dynamic.
I'm not sure if you're quoting policy. I haven't quite caught it yet. You referred to safe levels. Which part? I've got TA1B in front of me.
Development proposals that involve travel generation. Well, I accept it's well served by all modes of transport, but it should also provide safe access and appropriate car parking. So the issue is...
There is sorry, Councillor Bannister, I'm looking at TA1B as best I can.
I'm quoting from the report, paragraph 29.
Yes.
Yeah.
But TA1B does make reference, I think, in C to incorporating appropriate levels of parking provision to maximum standards laid out in SPP, but it also refers to applying maximum on-site parking standards to help encourage and promote a shift to more sustainable modes of walking and transport. So I think you're saying it's contrary to TA1B. On the basis that inadequate parking provision is provided,
given
the existing
concerns of on-street parking.
Yeah, given the existing situation with Kinross High Street.
Yes. But finally, the most important point is policy HE3A, which is conservation areas. And this is the one that I think is the important one, because it states that development within a conservation area must preserve or enhance its character or appearance. The design, materials, scale and siting of a new development within a conservation area should be appropriate to its appearance, character and setting, and I don't believe, as presently constructed, that the proposal does that.
Again, Councillor Barnacle, which particular aspects of the development do you think contravene HA3A?
The rear part of the development, the flatted area.
And again, for what reasons is that contravening?
Because I don't think it improves. We're looking at a proposal to change a site, and I think we can do better than what is before us in terms of the rear aspect of the development, to respect the existing conservation area, the neighbouring county buildings, places like that.
What I've got is contrary to policy HE3A, the rear flatted development proposal does not preserve or enhance, it would be.
Does not enhance the character or appearance of the conservation area, in my view.
Just a comment from a legal perspective, the minimum test is always preserve. It's not about always enhancing, it's actually minimum is preserve. So that's the basic, that's the threshold that has to be met. Now, you've referred to, I still think there was a little bit extra needed there, Councillor Barnacle, in the sense of reason, contrary to policy HE3A, reason the rear flatted development proposal does not preserve or enhance the character or appearance of the conservation area. But then it's a question of why. You have referred to the contemporary design earlier
because
on.
of the design. Yeah.
And massing in scale, I'm not trying to put words in
Scale as
it.
well, yeah.
Okay. I'm not sure, perhaps just a quick recap on the amendment. And that would be refuse on basis of, firstly, contrary to policy PM1A, not contribute positively to the surrounding built natural environment due to, firstly, the massing of and flat roof of the flatted building to the rear, and secondly, due to the contemporary design, which would be, of course, of the rear flats not fitting the area. Secondly, contrary to policy RD1, not protecting residential amenity, as a flatted building to the rear of the proposed development would overlook private amenity space of leave-in bank. Thirdly, contrary to policy TA1B, on the basis that inadequate parking provision is provided given the existing situation within Kinross High Street.
Yeah.
Fourthly, contrary to policy HE3A, the rear flatted development proposed would not preserve, does not preserve or enhance the character or appearance of the conservation area by reason of, due to the contemporary design, mass and scale of the flats to the rear.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine.
So I think formally, sorry, Vice Mayor, we have to formally ask Councillor Wilson whether you would be seconding that in those terms.
Yes.
Okay. Should be asking for any other amendment and then something.
Would there be any other amendments at all? Councillor Gray, would you like to sum up at all? Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Could I make a comment?
Councillor Robertson.
This is a very difficult situation, and as someone who has made a site visit, and I think the point that Mrs. Conliffe made is very important. I'm not normally a member of this committee, but any application that I'm not sure about, I always go and have a look at the site beforehand, and I think it's important that members do that. But can I comment specifically on this site? This is a very important site, as Councillor Barnacle said, in the centre of Kinross. But unfortunately, it's a very difficult site to develop. It's got an important sandstone building in the front of the site, looking out onto the high street. You know how hard this committee fought to safeguard the frontage, the Edwardian frontage of the old high school, when it came forward for an application came forward for its demolition. You rejected that unanimously, those who were on the committee at that time. This building sits alongside that. The building that's going to be retained sits alongside that, and the developer's got to be commended for being prepared to restore it and keep that important frontage. But it's a garage site that's contaminated. It's got, I would expect it to be an expensive site to develop. It's important that we conserve, we enhance the conservation area, but to leave this building as it is and to leave these old rusting iron sheds behind it is not in any way going to enhance the conservation area. And I think you can quite easily have a modern design attached to a fine sandstone building, and I think if it's done well, I'm sure that it will be done well, it will enhance the area. I think Mr. Mullen has done an excellent job in defending his corner, and I think the design has been changed substantially from what was originally proposed to meet the concerns of local residents, and Mr. Mullen in particular. So for those reasons, Vice Convener, I'll be supporting the application. Now I'll pass them to
Councillor Gray to sum up.
Thank you, Willie. I've got to say, taking on much of what Willie said there regarding the old derelict buildings in the background, it was the first slides we saw with these derelict buildings, not looking good, old corrugated metal roofs, and to suggest that this is not a positive improvement to the surrounding built environment is just ridiculous, frankly. Overlooking is not an issue. We are here to decide if it's an acceptable application, not whether there is a better fit somewhere in the ether. As far as I'm concerned, it is an acceptable fit, and very happy to approve it.
Thank you, Councillor.
Councillors, just before you vote, just to clarify, the motion is to approve, the amendment is to refuse for the 4 grounds which we've discussed.
Okay, members, in accordance with Standing Order 58 of Council Standing Orders, we will now take a roll call vote. When I call your name, if you could tell me whether you are voting for the motion as proposed by Councillor Gray and seconded by Councillor Anderson, or the amendment as proposed by Councillor Barnacle and seconded by Councillor Wilson, both summed up by Mr. Elliott. Councillor Anderson.
Motion.
Councillor Dugan.
Motion.
Councillor Barnacle. Councillor Braun.
Motion.
Councillor Coates.
Motion.
Councillor Drysdale.
Motion.
Councillor Gray.
Motion.
Councillor Jarvis.
Motion.
Councillor Illingworth.
Motion.
Councillor Robertson. Councillor Waters. And Councillor Wilson. Okay, so there was 9 votes in favour of the motion and 3 in favour of the amendment, so the motion will carry.
Thank you, committee. And with that, we will move on to the next application. This is application 522. It deals with the alterations and formation of decking to provide outdoor seating area, installation of a screen fence and associated works at the Caledoniann Bar in James Square, Crieff. And I'll ask again Mr. Niven to introduce.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, this application relates to the Caledoniann Bar in James Square in the centre of Crieff. The building is a Category C listed building located within the conservation area of Crieff. The bar in question occupies the ground floor of the building and extends out to the rear into a large flat-roofed extension, which extends actually into the car park, the public car park to the rear. The upper floors of the building directly above the bar also contain a number of private flatted dwellings. Full plan permission is being sought to form an outdoor seated area on top of the existing flat-roofed extension. on the rear of the building that faces out onto the car park. The proposals will involve dropping the sill on one of the existing windows to create an access onto that roof, and the installation of decking, fencing and 2 large freestanding umbrellas. The proposals will provide an additional 36 covers, and it is recommended the operating hours are restricted to 6 p.m. in order to protect neighbouring residential amenity. I have just one photograph as it adequately shows the entire site. This is taken from the car park to the rear. As you can see, there's the main building. If you like, the first floor of the building is where the bar is. That's the element. That's the 6/6 sash case windows. The flats above are in separate ownership. The proposals are to extend out onto that flat roof as you see there, and the window on the right-hand side of the rear is where they would drop the sill and provide an opening onto that roof space. And this leads back to the location plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Niven. We have one deputation on this case. And if I can ask Mr. Houghton to come forward, please. Again, as before, you have 5 minutes. We'll give you a minute, a warning when you're coming to the end, and if you could remain for any questions afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm here today to represent Mr. and Mrs. Paul, and they own one of the flats above this property. So it's not, if you went back to the photograph, it's not in effect, theirs is one from the top. So in effect, if you go at 1, 2, 3 sets of windows, they own the flat there. They've asked me to come along today just to speak on their behalf in relation to the recommendation, and they're concerned that this has been recommended for approval, and they're concerned that that's on the basis that a condition could be attached to the consent to control hours of use. Now, the starting point for this is obviously you've got premises here, and I took the opportunity to look up what their license says for the use of the premises, and this is a premises offering a bar, conferencing, meals, receptions such as weddings, funerals, birthdays, retirements, club meetings, live performances, dance facilities, gaming facilities, indoor and outdoor sports, and televised sports. Not quite sure what the outdoor sport element is, but clearly that's quite a wide range of uses which you'd expect in this sort of premises. I also happen to notice if you go on their Facebook page that, for example, just on the 20th of October they had live music, and that started at 8:30 and went through till late at night. So what you have here is obviously premise, important to the local area. My clients accept that. But you obviously have something that is principally an activity that goes on into the evening and sometimes quite late at night. And there have been issues already with regard to noise and disturbance with regard to the flats above. This is an old building. It's not been designed for things like sort of loud music and bands, so you both get noise and you just get the simple vibrations that can go through a building if you've got noise on one level sort of vibrating through the building to the upper levels. And so my clients were particularly concerned when they saw this proposal come forward on the basis of trying to allow outdoor activity at the rear of the property and to hope to deal with that simply by a condition. Now, what you're going to have out here is you're going to have people enjoying themselves. So they're going to be noisy. They're going to be probably smoking. They're going to be using language. Some of that will be nice. Some of it may not be so nice. And obviously, you've got people living above here who should have the right to open their windows and should have the ability to enjoy their own properties. And the concern is that that won't be able to take place if you have this use going on in an outdoor area. It's also telling that obviously when the application went in, the applicants asked for this to go on till 10 o'clock at night. And obviously the condition before you is obviously to restrict that, and then you're left with a situation where the original application is 10 o'clock. Is that not surely what the applicants really want in this situation? And of course they've agreed to making that earlier in response to, obviously, the case officer asking for that, because they would do that, wouldn't they, in order to get the recommendation that's before you today. So Mr. and Mrs. Paul, who I represent, are of the view that if you allow this with that condition, you're going to be leading straight away to almost immediate enforcement action, because they're simply going to breach it. They're either going to breach it or they're going to apply to vary it. Because clearly,
I've 1 minute left.
Okay, thank you. Because clearly their intention is they want to use this area far later at night than the condition proposes. And the enforcement of that condition is simply going to be left to bar staff and people working in this building who've got to go outside and say to somebody that's halfway through a meal or enjoying a drink, I'm sorry, time is up, you've got to come back inside. I mean, that simply is incredible to think that that would possibly work as a condition. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Houghton. Are there any questions for members? No? Thank you, Mr. Houghton. We'll open up now to questions for officers. Are there any questions for officers? Councillor Drysdale.
Yes, thank you, Convener. Yes, I would just like to, following on from these comments that have just been made, I would like to ask how enforceable a condition such as a 6 p.m. end time is for an outdoor place for people to enjoy themselves on a summer's evening. I mean, are we going to have somebody there every day to make sure it happens, or what will happen when if there is a breach or a complaint about a breach?
In the first instance, obviously, if we're conditioning it and we're stating it has to be 6 p.m, then that is our position on the matter. The applicant is aware of that, and they're aware we're taking it forward on that basis, and I believe they have accepted that. If they wanted to proceed beyond 6 p.m, then they would have to apply to vary the terms and conditions. But as we've said, 6 p.m. is the latest we would allow in discussion with environmental health. In respect to them breaching those terms as referred to by the agent, it's impossible to tell what they will do. If they do breach them, then we would need to look at taking potential enforcement action against that. And if residents do raise concerns about them continually breaching any conditions, then we would have to investigate that. However, it's impossible to say and to speculate at this stage. We have to deal with what's in front of us. And if we deem that if we're recommending it's acceptable until 6 p.m, then I think it would be unreasonable for us to refuse it on the basis of assumptions that certain things would take place, say working past 6 p.m, without the appropriate applications in place to vary that. But as explained in the report, I think we've adequately covered that by condition, and if matters do arise, then we would need to take action against that. But at this stage, I think it's too early to make that judgment.
Any further questions? Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Will the actual licensing not cover some of the concerns that the gentleman has here?
Yes, so licensing is a separate matter. Obviously, to planning, we do discuss these matters. They will look at other issues, say, for instance, if there is antisocial behaviour, the hours of their licence, what functions that take place within that building, they will look at those matters. Obviously, this is a separate element. Whether they have to come forward with a further amendment to their licence after this is something that they would need to pursue, but it is a dual process, if you like. But yes, they indeed can look into these matters separately on a licensing basis.
Thank you.
Perhaps I should come in there as Deputy Clerk to the Licensing Board and dealing with licensing issues. My memory of the licence is obviously it does not yet, the alcohol licence did not have the outdoor area licence. It doesn't exist at the moment at the back. They would have to apply to vary the layout plan to bring that in, and in assessing that, if it comes before members, the members wouldn't, at the licensing board, wouldn't be assessing the use. That would be here, planning, and this committee is assessing this as a use. The alcohol side, licensing would only be addressing whether alcohol could be in that area. However, later on, should there be reports of issues, that depends what those issues are and where they're coming from. And then potentially, yes, they could be enforceable through the alcohol licensing regime. But I do feel we're kind of straying into the alcohol licensing regime. Before members today is about the use of that area.
Any other questions, members? Then we'll go to debate. Any comments? Councillor Robertson.
When I read this application, it put me in mind of a similar application for Mullathorpe, where a premises applied for extensions and the flats above complained, and it was refused. And the commercial premises got around that by actually buying the flats above, and they now can operate normally. I would have serious concerns about, if I lived in the flats above, about our ability to actually safeguard their quality of life if we gave consent for this. So that's a comment I'd make, and I'd be happy to refuse on that basis.
So is that a formal motion for
Yeah.
you? Yeah. Let's do that. We've got a competent motion.
Again, Councillor Robertson, when you do need to refer to policy, what the terms of the policy are and why it's been breached, I think you've kind of given the why in the sense of the difficulties with the noise. This proposal could lead to problems with noise for the flats above, and we're only talking about the flats above and not the surrounding area, as I understand it. In terms of policy, I think it is referred to in the report. There is a noise pollution policy, EP8. Just read that. There will be a presumption against the citing of development proposals which will generate high levels of noise in the locality of existing or proposed noise-sensitive land uses, and similarly against the locating of noise-sensitive uses near to sources of noise generation. So I think, Councillor Robertson, I think it would be contrary to policy EP8 on the basis that the amenity of the flats above the proposal would not be protected. And may be subject to high levels of noise.
Seconded. Councillor Drysdale.
Yes, I'm happy to second on that basis. Obviously, the evening problem may or may not be enforceable, but there could still be potential noise pollution at any time of day.
Yes, sorry, Councillor Drysdale makes a valid point in that the motion for refusal is within the context of allowing, it's a 10 till 6, so it's on that basis upon which the refusal would be.
And do we have an amendment? No. So would we all be in agreement? Thank you. Application is rejected. And finally, we come to final application. This is alterations and extension to a dwelling house at 63 Viewlands Road West, Perth. And I'd ask Mrs. Conliffe to introduce, please.
Thank you, Vice Convener. This is a location plan. The site is in the Boroughmuir area, just off Viewlands Road West, and it's number 63, which you can just see. It's one of 2 bungalows. I think originally there were 3 bungalows. One has been altered. You can see from this plan, though, that there is a variation in terms of size of plots, size of properties within the immediate area around the site. This shows the application now. The application site is actually if you work from the left, it's the furthest to the right. You've got the two bungalows there, and as I say, it's the one to the right of the screen. This also shows that a previous property, the one on the corner, has been amended, and when you look further beyond in towards Ferries Road, you can see the difference in level of roofs, just to show that there are a number of different properties and property styles within this area of Perth. Looks as though it's falling down the hill, but this is the application site that you saw in the previous shot. This is just looking at the frontage of it. It's clearly very close to the adjoining property at number 63. Sorry, 65. 63 is actually the application site. And this final one is just to show the other side of the property and the existing vegetation. This is the boundary of the site, the hedge that you see to the right of the screen with the properties on Ferries Road. And then we're just back again to the site location plan.
Thank you, Mrs. Conliffe. We have one deputation, and if I can invite Mr. DeCecco, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the name right, so I apologise if I'm wrong. Sorry? Thank you very much. You have 5 minutes to speak. We'll give you a warning when there's 1 minute left, and if you could remain for any questions, please.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Alberto DeCecco. I reside at 26 Ferries Road, diagonally opposite the proposed planning application. I have been nominated as spokesperson on behalf of the objectors and the objectors within the residents who were not informed of the planning application. With reference to the Interim Development Quality Manager's Recommendation Report number 18/340, I wish to address the following items. Principle point 25. We consider the proposal does impact on the established amenity levels. Design and visual amenity. Point 26. There is a significant increase in the height of the finished roof ridge to almost twice the existing height. 27. The existing property, 67 Viewlands Road West, was originally of a similar bungalow design to the proposed application. This property, being located on a corner site, increased the footprint to accommodate a larger extension. The plans were submitted by the then owner, who was an attic conversion contractor. On completion of the works, the property was rented out for 12 months, then sold. The present owners of the property freely admit that they are astounded that the planning permission was granted, as they have uninterrupted, intrusive views to the surrounding properties from their upstairs windows. Landscape 28. Inevitably, an increase in size of the property will lead to an increase in occupants. This in turn increases the likelihood of the need of additional parking facilities, which will have an impact on the decrease of garden space. Residential amenity 29. In our opinion, the proposed increase in size of the property does affect residential amenity of adjacent properties because it is surrounded on 3 sides. Loss of privacy 30 refers to neither of the proposed gable windows raising any significant amenity concerns, as they would not look directly towards neighbouring existing windows. The only way to ascertain what impact the aforementioned windows in relation to an invasion of privacy is to either employ a drone and camera or scissor lift set at the height of the proposed windows, bearing in mind that the windows will enjoy a panoramic view, not as suggested in the report that the windows would have tunnel vision. It is my opinion, having worked in the construction industry for 52 years, that the windows will have a major impact on surrounding properties to the detriment of their privacy. Overshadowing 32. The proposed development will affect an increase in the shadow to 65 Viewlands Road West, which is currently affected by shadow cast from the present roof profile. An increase in roof height will exacerbate this. The existing natural light into the side window oblique door area of 65 Viewlands Road West will be decreased, as will the heat element from the sunlight. This in turn will lead to higher heating and lighting costs, which is against government requirements to meet the eco targets. 33. The shadow cast by the proposal will impact on habitable rooms at 65 Viewlands Road West. The kitchen dining area is very much in use and is in some instances more than the living room. Roads and access, 34. Enlargement of the property, increased occupancy and additional vehicles will hugely impact on access provision as it presently exists. Currently, vision is obscured from both sides, calling into question road safety and on-street parking. In conclusion, the proposed extension to 63 Viewlands Road West will encroach on 10 neighbouring properties, executing unreasonably over dominance. Thanks very much.
Thank you, sir. Do we have any questions for Mr. DeCecco? Councillor Wilson.
Thank you for your presentation. Roads and access. Do you want to advise the committee just of the proximity of this application site in relation to the local schools?
Two schools within less than 50 yards. And morning and afternoon, start of schools, finish of schools, very congested, extremely congested.
Thank you.
Any further questions? No. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your time. We'll open up questions for officers. Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Vice Convener. Could the planning officers advise us, if this application were approved, the effect on any permitted development rights within the plot for further building and development?
You will see in our recommendation of approval that we haven't proposed to remove any permitted development rights to the property. They would still have permitted development rights with regard to anything within the garden ground. But if members were suggesting that they were going to go for approval on the application and wanted that as a further condition, then that could be added. We didn't think it was important because anything would be in the rear garden ground and it would be something like a shed or something like that.
My second question is in relation to transport and traffic, which was referred to by the deputation. There's no recommendation, I don't think, in the suggested conditions for entering and leaving the site in a forward gear. Is that something that was considered by the officers?
You will see that this is effectively an extension to the existing dwelling house. Whilst the upper floor will provide 2 bedrooms, ultimately it will be 1 additional bedroom to the current proposal. And the current bungalow has a driveway that you saw on their third slide. There is no suggestion that there will be a major increase in traffic, and therefore it was not considered important that there should be a turning within the site, which is the case for a number of properties along that road. I accept that it is close to the school, but it just means that anybody living within that property will take greater care entering or leaving the site. I don't know if there's any further comments that my transport colleague would like to make.
No, I think you've covered it well. It's an established access. There are a number of accesses in the area which are the same, essentially, and is a very minimum increase in rooms. There is already enough space in the driveway to accommodate 2 to 3 vehicles quite easily. If the applicant wishes to come forward at a later time for turning facilities, that would be considered at the time. And indeed, there's examples of that in the area also.
Any further questions? I'll move to debate. Any comments from members? Could I ask if we have a motion then?
Move a motion. Convener, I'm aware of the time, so I'll try and be brief. I want to move a motion for refusal of the application. And the reasons for that, I think some of them were outlined in the deputation that we heard. I think this was originally a line of 3 bungalows. We've already got one that you saw well displayed, which looks to me like a villa on steroids, to be quite honest. I was surprised that application was approved. It is a corner site. It's different from this site. These sites are very tight. There's some good photographs that show how tight they were between the houses in Ferries Road and the main road. Viewlands Road West is an extremely busy road at any time, but at school time, as was pointed out, it's next door to Perth High School, which has got a pupil population of nearly 1,600, and Oakbank Primary School that's got a population of about 450, plus the staff, plus all the other associated transport. The road is extremely busy outside at this particular location for substantial periods of the day, not just at school time, but throughout the day. My reasons for suggesting refusal is in policy PM1A, placemaking. I don't consider that this proposal contributes positively to the quality of the surrounding built environment. And the reason for that, sorry, I'll let Mr. Elliott, I don't consider it contributes positively to the quality of the surrounding built environment because of the height, because of the overshadowing, and that's referred to in the report, and because of loss of privacy. Height, overshadowing and loss of privacy. On policy PM1B, placemaking, I think it's, Convener Mr. Elliott will keep me right, but I think it's C. The design and density should complement the surroundings in terms of appearance and height and scale. I'm not concerned about materials, finishes and colours because they could be conditioned, but I think PM1C, again, the appearance and height would be the reasons. Okay, and then policy RD1, residential areas. I don't think that the proposal adds to residential amenity, and in fact will diminish the residential amenity of the house at number 65 Viewlands Road West in particular, but also the adjacent house in Ferries Road, which is number 28 Ferries Road. And these would be the three reasons, Vice Convener.
Councillor Wilson, can I clarify? What I have at the moment is policy PM1A. The proposal would not contribute positively to the surrounding built and natural environment due to the height of the proposal and overshadowing of neighbouring properties and the loss of privacy to the neighbouring properties.
Yes, yes.
So I have that one. PM1B-C, you've referred to, it's contrary to PM1B-C due to the appearance and height of the proposal. Could you elaborate a wee bit more? What's the, in terms of the issue?
Well, I thought that was enough, but okay. The appearance and height in relation to the surrounding.
Okay, in relation to the surrounding
properties.
Bear with me, look at RD1.
My contention, Vice Convener, is that the proposal does not protect the residential amenity, particularly of number 65 Viewlands Road West and number, I think I've got the number right, 28. 26, I beg your pardon, 26, thank you, 26 Ferries Road.
Sorry, just catching up. So, contrary to policy RD1, on the basis that it wouldn't protect the existing residential amenity, particularly 65 Viewlands Road West,
yes,
and
26
Ferries Road.
Yeah.
Can you then say why? What's the residential amenity affected?
Due to the height
how does that in terms of
that goes back to
number one,
overshadowing and
yes,
loss of privacy.
It's not the height. Well, the height is the reason for it, but the amenity affected, I think, is the overshadowing and the privacy.
Yeah, yeah. Caused by the height, in my view. And I'll rest my case at that, Vice Convener.
So, contrary to policy RD1, not protecting existing residential amenity, particularly 65 Viewlands Road West and 26 Fairies Road, due to overshadowing and affecting the privacy.
Yeah, I was just about to come in and say, if you're talking about the one immediately to the east, it's 28.
Apologies, Vice Convener, it's 28. It's 28. Okay. I was right the first time.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Barnacle?
Happy to second.
Do we have an amendment? Councillor Gray?
Yes, thank you. I would like to approve the paper. I cannot see, there are two-storey buildings or second floors, whatever way you look at it, throughout the area. And I think the opinion on overlooking is quite exaggerated. I cannot see overlooking being relevant to this particular development, and I can see no reason, frankly, for refusing it that's valid. Thank you.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Watters? Councillor Wilson, would you like to sum up?
Very briefly.
Very briefly.
If I stand by my arguments, and of course it is to a degree a matter of opinion. If the committee, however, are minded to approve the application, I would ask Councillor Gray if he'd be prepared to accept a diminution in permitted development rights on the property, which I think Mrs. Concliffe referred to, as was considered but set aside, and also the standard one to have the vehicles entering the site would allow them to enter in a forward gear. Given my comments about traffic, I can hardly do anything else, Vice Convener. And perhaps Councillor Gray would be willing to accept either or both of these. The first one was because there will inevitably be in a more intensive use in the site. My contention is that we would not want the further development of the particular plot, and therefore, and I think Mrs. Concliffe did mention that planning did look at a condition restricting further development rights on that. In relation to, I don't want this to be a ping-pong discussion, but if Councillor Gray, who's normally really sharp on these things, this is just to allow safer access and egress from the property, because I think that it would enhance the safety both in the road and of the occupants of the house.
Further development of the footprint of the house itself, then I would agree to that. But as Mrs. Concliffe pointed out, a garden shed, I have no argument with a small garden shed. But it's the footprint of the house. I appreciate your point.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm not quite sure which we're talking about here. Permitted development right, you've got two parts really. One is if it was within the garden ground, and the other is if it's part of the house. Now, clearly, the current application doesn't extend the footprint. It extends it, obviously, upwards. So are you talking about any extension to the footprint of the building as an extension? Because that would require planning consent.
Okay, so that wouldn't be automatically within permitted development rights. Okay, right, and in which case that matter, Vice Convener, falls. Yeah. Okay. I still want to stick to my guns about the forward gear, but I don't think Councillor Gray agrees with me.
No.
Thank you, Mayor. Sorry. Yes, I think I know what Councillor Wilson knows what I'm about to say, but we're at risk of the mover of a motion for refusal asking the amendment to approve to amend his amendment to in terms of approval, which is unusual. But
as you know, Vice Convener, I don't give up easily.
That is very unusual. So, Councillor Gray, after that discussion, am I correct in saying you're just looking to approve per the report? Absolutely. Okay. Members, I think where we've got to is the motion is to refuse, the amendment is to approve.
Okay, members, once again, in terms of Standing Order 58, the Council Standing Orders, we'll be taking a roll call vote. When I call your name, you can let me know whether you're voting for the motion as proposed by Councillor Wilson and seconded by Councillor Barnacle, or the amendment as proposed by Councillor Gray and seconded by Councillor Waters. Councillor Anderson.
Amendment.
Councillor Deegan.
Amendment.
Councillor Barnacle.
Motion.
Councillor Brown.
Amendment.
Councillor Coates.
Amendment.
Councillor Drysdale.
Amendment.
Councillor Gray.
Amendment.
Councillor Jarvis.
Amendment.
Councillor Illingworth.
Amendment.
Councillor Robertson. Councillor Waters. And Councillor Wilson. So members, there's 3 votes in favour of the motion and 9 in favour of the amendment, so the amendment will carry.
Okay, thank you, members. Thank you for your time and certainly your patience this morning.